Hey everybody, just working on that 2001 Silverado box. So this panel here was done via cut and butt. So what I did is, it was kind of rotten up in here and up in here. The lip underneath wasn't real bad, but it was wavy, and once they go wavy, the integrity's gone. So you can hammer it up and paint it, but it always comes back in a year. So just cut it right off. And it was only, I think it was wavy in the middle, but it was rotten here and right here. So basically, I cut a little chunk out and I kept going up until the backside was good. And it was literally just this edge that was gone. Up here was good. So then what I did is I made this piece. We laid it on and put a few clamps. And then I ran a grinder, cut a nice thin line. You got to watch because this tends to fall in. And once it falls in where it's flush, put a tack, and then you can push it in, put a tack. And it's not 100% but it's pretty good. Good enough that we're going to be able to fill it. Here it fell in because I did this line to let it fall in. I went here. Something let go over here and it kind of moved in a little bit, so you can see that on camera. It's really not that bad. We're gonna sandblast this to make all the welds rough, and that'll get all that in there, so we'll fill it up and that'll be fine. So the cut and butt works good. I still got to do something with this spot right here. Figure that integrity's too gone to treat, so we'll probably cut that out and put a little piece in. Down here there's a perfect round hole for some reason, but we're going to put a corner in it. And that one over there has some tearing around the nut or the bolt, so we still got to fix those. But we'll come around to the other side. So this side I did it the other way, just to see how it's going to go time-wise and whatnot. You're still, now this is just, I made the same type of panel. Now this side wasn't rotten at all up here. There was two little black dots right down here, like stain in the metal from a couple of chips, but there was zero rot in it. However, the underlip, right about midway, had thinned out and was rusted all the way across. So we basically, and I came down a little further than I had to. You can see how I overhanged it. Same there. And that's all welded in. Now this one, as I was welding it and it was hot, well, I mean, first I put a bunch of tacks, got it in place. It's just over top. So there's a little lip in there. We put it over top. And once it was tacked, you'd come in and weld little short strips, I guess, like 1, 2, 3. I usually hold it on, go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But anyway, we'll do a video where we show that later. But once here, I knew it would get a little hot, so I filled it, letting it sort of get hot. And as it was cooling down, I tapped it in with the hammer. So this is knocked in, and this is going to be, if I put a straight edge, I wonder if you can see it, it's going to flush out. The same with this whole line. It's hard to tell on camera, but it kind of, this is slightly tilted in, so that'll all fill right out. So once we grind this off, we'll sand this off to about here. We'll fill it in. It's pretty smooth. There's a little bit of a wave right here, so might have to touch that up a bit. But all the repairs from about here down, with the exception of a little bit of finishing putty there. So this is going to finish out easy. Whichever way you do this, it doesn't, I don't know that it matters all that much. Now, the one thing about the cut and butt is there's no extra layers. And if you're doing something like an older vehicle where you can see under the fender, you'll see a bit of a weld in there, but you could get in and clean it up or not, but nothing will stick. Where when you have that little layer, 2 layers, stuff gets in there. You prime behind your panels and everything, but as you weld, you're kind of burning a lot of that off. So it is what it is, but I mean, you do what you can, and that's the main thing. As far as the cut and butt versus going on top goes, the cut and butt can be more precise to some degree if the metal's really healthy, because you're going to put a little less filler. You don't have to knock it in. This is a work truck. We're not going over this with straight edges and all this constantly, so it's just going to be fixed up, blocked out. Has been repainted before, don't care. We had a spot I think I showed in a short down here. It had got hit and there was some filler in there and a little dent, and it was all kind of rusty in behind, so yeah, cut that out, put a piece on, left the edge here, left it a little too long, and then knocked it around and then just filled that with welds. So once that grinds off, that'll be pretty smooth. And again, this one's just over the top and I knocked it in. And once I grind it down, I'll run a straight edge on it. If it needs to not be knocked in a little more, we'll do that. But because it's right on the corner, you can kind of feather it out. And this corner had like it rounded in. I looked at the other side and it didn't. But because everything else is straight, we should be able to fill that and run it straight and then just kind of ease the corner, and it'll look stock. No one will know the difference. I believe down here was okay, but there was a dark mark, so I threw a little chunk of metal behind it and welded that full. We're going to grind that flush. That's literally its own patch. When you're doing that, it takes a little bit of time. I always put a piece of metal at the back side, not so much as a patch, but just to take the heat. So that'll work. Like guys talk about welding up pinholes. This ended up being a little more, but I mean, burn it away until it stops. And if it keeps going, you can do a patch. But I was able to just run a bead kind of down around here where it was hard, and then I just kept putting lumps until we filled it up. It worked. I could have put a patch. It was just a different way of doing it, so I figured we'd try that. Right here, there was no hole whatsoever, but there was a couple little dark marks. And I basically just slapped them in with the hammer and ran 2 solid beads, one here and then one here. Nothing burnt through, nothing melted. It was real healthy, but just in case, right? Whatever spot was there ain't gonna come out and rust. Rest of the edge in here, you see a little bit of that. We'll either sandblast that, treat that, epoxy primer, you get it. Here's just a patch that went right over top. We had a soft spot in the corner. It had been tore and kind of rotten. This is off the front fender of a Dodge Ram, so it had a lot of the shape in it. But what it didn't have, and the reason it's cut on that nice curve, it'll be a little easier to fill out and hide. But that's all we really needed. And here I left a good 1.25 inches. And what I did is I bent it. And the funny thing, I put the patch on and I left it out like so. I ran a line behind it. And when it was flat, the line was perfectly straight. So I just bent it in a 3-foot bender, which like a sheet metal brake, which you can get at Princess Auto or Harbor Freight. I didn't use a fancy tool for that. And here what I did, you can see all those little lines. I used that in the shrinker. Again, Princess Auto, Harbor Freight, down in the States. And I just kept shaping it until I got the shape I wanted. And then right here, it needed a little more shape. So what you do is you just kind of catch that edge, and it almost puts like a tuck in it. And then you go out close to the edge and it'll just shrink it a little tighter. If you put a little too much in, put it in the stretcher and just, you know, gently, it pulls it, right? Takes it out. So I got a few tacks there. The lip was healthy, but we'll leave that for strength. This is where it was bad, way down here. And here the metal seemed, you know, a little off. So why not just go up where it's clean and solid? And again, so that's just sitting right over top. And I hammered it as I was welding it. I might go over this again. You can see all those little spots. I like to fill them solid. So we'll probably go in here and weld all these little ones. Thing is, we could do 1, 2, 3 in a row and kind of hammer it in while it's hot, and it'll just kind of bring it in a little bit. But realistically, where it is, it's so close. We're gonna go from back here with the fill anyways. We're probably just gonna fill it out. I'm not too worried about it. So there's just different ways of patching. What works, what doesn't, what's good, what's bad. experience and time, the more things you do and how long they last. But all these different ways I've tried it multiple times, and they all seem to work. They all seem to hold out for a long time. When you're restoring vehicles and older vehicles, or just a refresh, or I do a lot of 60s and 70s stuff, so any of this will work. In the case of this, we're talking work truck, so all these techniques, the welding up pinhole concept, for instance, in a rare hood, if everything's thick, you can pull this. It does literally exactly what that is. Oh, so when this was hot, I did knock it in. You'll have to trust me, but I don't know if we can see it. It does dimple in, so we won't have to grind all of it off, just enough. We can run a straight edge across. There's going to be a little bit of filler. It'll probably come out like so. But I mean, this has to have a little layer skim coat. I mean, it's really just a skim coat, so we'll be good there. But you have all these options. If you're trying to improve your game or get better at this, or whatever the case may be, everything works. This is the only one that I would suggest. Maybe don't do that unless you kind of have the time. And what I did is I didn't try to fill it and keep going. I kind of went around the edge a little bigger and just put dabs on the metal to see where it would hold and where it would burn through. And I ran it like, say, as I welded, it was like 1, 2, 3, and pull it away. But you got to know how hot your welder is and where it is. Now, I could have turned it down 1 notch, and I probably wouldn't have burnt through as much, so the repair would have been smaller. But then if the metal isn't as good, you don't really know. So I ran it where I ran all the welding everywhere else, which didn't burn through anywhere whatsoever. It was good. And because I know that, I could keep going from the middle out bigger and bigger and bigger in different directions until I caught good metal and it stayed. And once I caught that, I kind of went around the edge and chased it. Then I put a little piece in behind and just kept filling it with nice big hot dabs. Normally I can get that to sink in, but in this case, not quite as much. So anyway, I'm going to look at the backside and clean that up and grind it and see what happens. But I mean, if I'm not happy with that, we'll zip that out, because I know all around it is super heavy and thick. The other side had a weird hole at the back, but this side almost looked like there was a hole that had been repaired here, like a perfect hole. So it was kind of hard to tell. I don't know if there was some kind of fender flares or something on it. There wasn't one at the back, but it was so messed up back there, who knows. But anyway, if that doesn't grind out and leave a lot of thickness, we'll just cut it out and weld a quick little patch in later. I think it's going to be all right. That's the only one I wouldn't attempt if you're not really good at it. But again, you can do it. Just keep in mind, you're going to try to run it not hot to save it. But if it's so thin that it burns away compared to every other patch, and especially the ones down low, I don't know why, but when you work on these boxes, even when they're not rotten, from about here down, they seem to be a little thinner. And I don't know if it's because when they press the panel, maybe that edge gets stretched as it pushes around. But like even this one, like say here is really thick, but when you get down to here, not so much. The bottom gets thin. When I went inside this and cleaned the greasy oil stuff off, it's super thick. Every time I work on one of these trucks, that's something I notice. So maybe it does get thin over time, but even when there's zero rust, they seem thinner on those bottom panels. So that being said, metal that I used, that's 18 gauge, and it's off of a remnant from a patch panel. The piece I used on the opposite side was a piece of 18 gauge, just out of my own steel stock. This is out of a Dodge hood, and the reason I went that way, it's a little bit thinner, but so is all the metal down there. So if everything's the same, the welds seem to center and work a little better. You could have ran 18 here, and all you have to do is kind of start on the 18, bring it up into the softer metal and back down with your beads. When they're both the same, you can kind of just fire away, do your beads. Again, I didn't want that one all worked because I want as little filler as possible, but I will go in between all those welds and do another couple of welds and fill them in solid. all the options work. You just have to think about it a little bit. When you try something a little bit sketchy, again, like I said down there, I didn't turn the heat down. I used the same heat that I used actually right after doing this. I went over to that hole and just kept going. My thought was, if it keeps melting, we got to put a patch in anyway. So the metal I used, here's what you should use. This might save you time. Excuse the mess, but I'm not a YouTube video guy. This is a job for me. The videos are just for fun. And if I can help anybody, cool. And if you get something out of it, great. This is what it is, patch panel from LKQ. You can get them in the States and Canada, wherever. I assume that's a part number. But that's a pretty significant patch panel. Now, the original box for this truck would have needed at least this, but it also needed both bottoms on both sides. So all 4 lower quarters would have had to been rebuilt. The biggest issue with his original box, even when you went way up into the sides, looking underneath, there was so much rust that it was caking off. And when you pushed on the side of the box, it felt thin. Once you start putting panels this heavy, now I looked at this and I compared it to the 18 gauge and it seemed to be about the same thickness. This might be like between 20 and 18. Maybe it starts out at 18 and then when they stamp it, whatever the case may be. Now, why I didn't use these panels, and I do have both of them for both sides, but I didn't use them on the truck. See, it's got the body shape in it and whatnot. Now, a lot of these trucks, when they're really bad, they kind of rot up in here, especially if they have flares. Some of the flares go up here, so this all gets crusty. So these are great. You can always angle cut these so that you don't have the corner to heat up and just run it round. But anyway, the reason I didn't use these, especially in Canada right now with shipping, these are really expensive. This truck is so common, I've done half a dozen of them in the last few years. So I'm just going to keep these. A friend at another body shop might need a set. I'll just send them over or whatever. But what I did is I used these and drew out everything to make those. I mean, this cost me nothing because it was left over off of, basically, I had one of these for the F350 that we did, and we cut all the extra stuff from the top we didn't need. And it was a significantly bigger panel than this. There was quite a lot of it. So I literally took that piece, and it's actually a little bit thicker than what's up here, but it worked. And the other side was basically just some 18 gauge steel. And that worked just fine too. And I literally did the exact same thing. I drew the arch on the back, bent it. When you bend it, because you have that angle, I did it in a vise, nothing fancy. I basically put it on, drew the line. Now I didn't put it on here because it was kind of rough and rusty and wavy. I put it on the other patch panels that I had. But I mean, there would have been enough here that you could have found that line. And I just put it in a vise with the line facing to me and hammered it on the back, from the back side with a hammer, and just slowly kept folding it over and following the curve. Even in the vise, you can pull it off. Take your time, and you'll kind of find the groove and you'll be able to do it. It's really not that difficult. It's like anything else. So there's a couple videos I should make doing some of that. Unfortunately, I do get super busy, and when I get really, really busy, I don't like to do that. Yeah, that's just the shape of the box. So, all these things can be done. When you bend this over, because of this angle going this way, it tends to take this panel and do this to it. You can kind of flatten it out and hammer it and play with it and redo the bottom, redo the top, and eventually you'll get it to work just with a few hammers and a stump. But again, like I explained with this little guy down here and the shrinker stretcher, you can catch this edge and use the shrinker stretcher. And I did on this side. You can see the little teeth marks and the black EDP coating. And when I did it, it actually worked so well that it just brought it out to where it fit nice. But I guess I hit it a little too hard about here, and it kind of came out too far. I believe that was the stretcher I was using, so then I had to put it in the shrinker, or vice versa anyway, and just kind of bring it back. So if you go too far, you can undo it if you got the shrinker and the stretcher. The other side, I didn't. I believe the other side, it was a little bit closer. And I think the reason why is because I didn't come down these curves. So the curve was less, so this curve was less. And yeah, that's what I thought. There's no marks from that at all. I basically just set it, hammered it from the back side on a wooden stump, and just kind of worked it gently until the curve went away. This starts to pop out, you knock it back in, you flatten this again. Anyway, it takes a couple minutes, fits right on the truck. And it fits so tight that I could hold it to the inner part, because I had to redo the inner on this side. The other side I didn't. It was totally fine. The cool thing is what I had to fix was below. There's rubber little plugs in the back for oiling in there. There's one right here, one right here. Both of them are still in. This one, however, was messed up, so it's gone. So when we do the oil, we'll have to spray it in that direction and blast it all in there. But I mean, you can even reach up from inside the back fender, and you kind of got access to above it. Anyway, that's it for that. I think I covered pretty much everything. So all these different types of welding and whatnot, it all works. It's all relative to what you feel like doing and what you're comfortable with. I wasn't a cut and butt guy. I did a lot of stuff like this years ago. That was how we all did it in the 90s and 2000s. So, which I'm sure back in the 80s, who knows? I mean, a lot of the quarters and everything, they used to just put them right on top, weld them on, bunch of Bondo. But I've cut apart a lot of cars that were restored in the 80s and 90s that have come in. Things are failing and cracking. People go, oh, if it was done right, it wouldn't come apart. Look, it was done 20, 30 years ago. It was probably done on the cheap because you see all those nice fancy cars outside. And even these were all like $400 or $500 cars back in the day, and they were junk. So people bought them. They threw a lot of Bondo in them and patchwork. And look, if that lasted 20 some years and then they bring it to you to have it redone, I mean, they were driven in the winter and what have you, and before and after in some cases. And I mean, I think it's okay that they fall apart after 20, 30 years, in my opinion. I mean, but, so there's nothing wrong with any which way you do this. Just make sure that things are solid. If there's any rot that's going to come out, it's got to go, or be buried, or be covered in a way that won't promote more rust, right? So if you have it overlapped, that's fine, but don't just go metal over metal completely. Like, you'll get condensation in there. And again, I mean, if this is an old beater you're driving for the next 2, 3, maybe 5 years, by the time it comes out, it won't even matter. So you just got to judge, you know, the better a vehicle is, the less, you know, like, here's another reality. If all the metal was super duper good underneath, you could literally put this over top, tack it, fill it, probably be totally fine. Not the right way. I'd rather cut the bad stuff out from behind. What are you working on, and how long does it need to last? Like, that's something you could think about. Like, if you're doing a $1,500 Ford Ranger and that's going to get you through for a year or two until you go buy something new, don't go crazy. It's that simple. So all these things work. There's no wrong way. This wasn't a repair. This was a dent. I just picked up a piece of scrap steel, put it here, put 3 beads of weld on it, and pulled it and hammered it around a bit. It's out enough now that I can fill it without putting too much fill on it. So, in case you were wondering what that spot up there was, it looks like a burnt weld. But that's it for today. Cheers.